Let's make a family structure sculpture. For this assignment, you're going to learn some basic paper engineering and sculpture techniques to make two-dimensional shapes into three-dimensional forms. The basic techniques that I'll show you are folding, cutting, and reverse folding, the slot technique, and bending and curling. But you can use other techniques that you think of on your own. For this assignment, you will need some cardboard packaging. It could be a thin cardboard like this box, or it could be thicker cardboard. If you're using a thin box like this, you can use scissors. If you're using thicker cardboard, you might need to use a box cutter or an X-Acto knife carefully to cut out your shapes. To make my first shape and form, I'm going to look at my sketchbook and choose one of the shapes that I made for one of the family members. It's kind of a triangular shape with that has a little curve that's going through the shape. When you're drawing your shapes, don't just draw simple triangles and squares and rectangles. Try to develop unique shapes. I changed the shape a little bit. It's not just a triangle because I added another shape going through it. So maybe you can overlap different shapes. And so right now I'm going to draw the little swirly shape that's going through my bigger shape. Make sure you're using pencil because that way if you do make a mistake, you can erase it. When I drew it at first, it kind of looked like a mustache, so I decided, no, that's not what I wanted to look like. So I made it a little bit more curved on one end, and I made it a little bit more asymmetrical instead of making it symmetrical. And I thought that that would just look less like a mustache and more like just a wavy kind of shape. After you draw your shape, go ahead and color it in. Whatever you have to color it in, you could use markers, you could use color pencils, you could use crayons. I found that it was really helpful to practice cutting and bending and folding and using some of these techniques before I actually started on the one that I have just spent a lot of time painting and coloring in. So I made a little version of what I just showed you, and I bent it, I cut it, and then I did a reverse bend so that I have a three-dimensional form. Now I'm going to do that again a little slower. So here I am bending the cardboard, depending on how thick it is. You might not be able to do this technique with a thicker cardboard unless you score it first, which means cutting through it halfway. But this is pretty thin, so I'm going to be able to cut it with scissors. And it would work much better with an X-Acto knife, but because I know a lot of people don't have X-Acto knives at home and probably have scissors, I'm just using scissors to demonstrate this. So what I did was I cut a little tiny hole in the paper, and now I'm cutting. Now I don't want to cut it all the way through. I'm actually stopping before I get to the end of the triangle. So I'm cutting and very carefully, and it's curved, so I have to kind of do it just a little bit at a time. And I'm stopping right before I get to the end of the triangle. So this technique, of course, you don't have to make exactly what I made. I don't want you to make exactly what I made. You can use this to create stair type of forms, and I'll post some pictures of other types of forms that you can make using this technique. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically bend them in opposite directions. So I bent the background shape in one direction, and I'm bending that outer shape in another direction so that it creates a three-dimensional looking form out of that two-dimensional material. The next shape that I created, I'm actually just going to be cutting sort of a spiral into the shape. Sorry, my video is a little off here, but I think that you can still get the idea. Try to move it to the center there. So I'm just kind of cutting it in a spiral all the way into the center and thinking about the shape that it's creating while I'm doing that. And this particular shape is for my mom. She does love to garden, so it does resemble a flower a little bit, but it is abstract. You can make your shapes realistic if you want, but I just decided to keep mine abstract. And then I'm just bending this to try to make it stand up and make it into a three-dimensional sculpture. And, it just takes a little bit of trial and error to figure out what's going to work. Maybe the first time you do it, it doesn't look quite right. So, check it out, look at it from different points of view, and then, go back and maybe modify it a little bit, bend it a little bit. There's no one right way or wrong way. You just bend it until it looks like something that you like and is pleasing to your eye. So the finished piece looks like this. And I like how there's a lot of negative space. So the negative space is the cutout space. The next technique I'm going to show you is how to fold a piece of cardboard to use as your main structure of your sculpture. So I just folded it in half, a rectangle, and I'm really going to go along the edge of that fold to make sure it's standing up. And as you can see, it kind of gives your sculpture legs right away. So now I can make that into whatever shape I want. The fold is at the top. So you don't want to cut off the fold that you made because that's going to be important for making your sculpture stand up. But you can cut that into any shape. So I used to teach this assignment to elementary students, and they would make theirs into the shape of an animal body and then add the head and other things. But I'm actually just going to make an abstract shape that represents someone in my family. This person is kind of silly sometimes. So I wanted to make some shapes that looked kind of freeform. And so on the inside, I cut the outside to be sort of geometric, but then the inside has this kind of curvy shape that I'm going to cut out. And now I'm cutting through both pieces of board. So it's going to be a little harder to cut it out. And after I cut it out, I'm actually going to be saving those pieces. So now it stands up. So I could keep the form just like that if I wanted to. But I'm going to use another technique on this sculpture, which is called the slot technique. So, I could have left it on its other side, but I thought, oh, maybe I'll turn it this way and see what it looks like. And, you just have to kind of experiment, try it different ways, see what it looks like and where you're going to put the different shapes. And so now this is the slot technique. Slot technique is when you cut a slot and then you cut another slot where you're going to be attaching that piece. And then you kind of fit them together like that. So earlier in the year, we learned about repetition, creating repetition and rhythm in art. And so now I have a shape that I cut out. It's the same shape that I have that I attached, and I have one more. So I'm actually going to attach that one as well. So I'm going to think about where to attach that one. And once I find a place that I think that it will fit nicely, I'm actually going to be using the slot technique again. So I'll cut a slot, and I want to be careful not to cut all the way through my sculpture and cut it in half. And then I cut a slot into the shape, and then you kind of wiggle it together. And you might have to open up the slot a little bit so that you can fit those together. And this is a great technique to, especially if you have thicker cardboard, you might only be able to use the slot technique. Some of the other paper engineering techniques might not work out as well. So the slot technique is a super sturdy way to build a sculpture with lots of different shapes combined. So your final sculpture could be 3 separate smaller sculptures kind of grouped together, or you can actually make one large sculpture. So make shapes to represent different family members and then use the slot technique to put them all together into one structure. I decided to make 3 separate structures, 3 separate sculptures, just because my material was a little bit lighter weight and I didn't think that everything could support it if I made a giant sculpture. When you're all finished, take some photographs of your sculpture. It helps to take it against a blank wall, maybe shine a light on it. That way I can see your sculpture better. You could take multiple pictures or even a video and upload it to our site.